Welcome to the most exciting panel of the weekend, not to take anything away from anybody else. My name is Ken Glanc. I'm with a group called the Illyria Comic Book Initiative. We're a nonprofit that promotes literacy and creativity through comic books. Get kids excited about reading comics, and then we show them how to make their own original comic book, like in an after-school type of setting. It is my pleasure to host this panel today where we are discussing comic books and education. I've got a great group of individuals that make up the panel today. To my immediate left, I have Robert Loss. I have Tom Hart, Carol Tyler, I have Caitlin McGurk, and I also have at the very far end Ryan Claytor. I believe we have one more gentleman that might be crashing our panel. His name is Lee Smith. If he comes in, he'll sit to my immediate right. But what I was hoping to do today to start off, I've introduced our panelists. I'm going to give them each just a couple moments. If you could say who you are, what you do, kind of the background, education, if you kind of keep it inside 2 minutes. I've got a group of questions that I'll put out for each of you if you can answer those, and then we'll open it up for questions to the crowd. Okay? Mosh pit will ensue down here. All righty. So to my immediate left, Robert Loss. Robert, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your focus on education with comics?
Sure. I'm from the Cleveland area. I went to Ohio Wesleyan for my undergraduate and to Ohio State for an MFA in creative writing. I started teaching at CCAD, Columbus College of Art and Design, in 2005. And over the course of teaching as an adjunct at different schools, I used comics in different classes, including writing and arts, which is like the freshman composition class, but also contemporary literature, world literature, that sort of thing. And a couple of years ago, our chair of the Department of English in CCAD suggested I teach a course on the literature of comics and graphic novels at CCAD, and so we put that together, and since then it's run every semester, it fills every semester, and some really great things have started to happen there based around comics. And so 2 years ago I started trying to get together a conference that we call MIX, Comic Symposium. We had the first one of those last fall, and that was a pretty big success. We brought in Chris Ware, we had a really good time. And since then, we're looking at doing MIX this coming fall. Jeff Smith will be the keynote speaker for that. And I write for Pop Matters and other online sort of places, working on different writing projects, including a book about comics. So,
Welcome. Perfect. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks.
Tom, tell us a little bit about SAW.
My name is Tom Hart. I run the Sequential Artist Workshop. It's a freestanding school in Gainesville, Florida for comics. I taught comics at the School of Visual Arts in New York City for 10 years. And at some point got a little bit antsy and a little bit tired of New York and a little bit antsy about having a little more freedom to teach comics the way I sort of wanted them taught. So that all coincided with moving to Gainesville and starting my own school in an old wood shop. As far as I know, it's only 3. Tom, you can tell me if this is true. 3 freestanding comic schools in the country, along with CCS and the Joe Kubert School. We have a year-long program there where students come and study the entire year. They have Monday through Friday classes. They have a comics history class. We also have the reading of regular literature. We have reading graphic novels, but also producing artwork of all kinds. We also do things for the community, like evening classes and classes for teens and things like that. But mostly we're focused on the year-long program. We also have a loose affiliation with the University of Florida, which actually has a very big department, or sort of sub-department in the English department of people interested in comics and studying comics. You ever go to that conference?
I haven't been to it, but Image Text is a great website, academic website, but I mean, really interesting stuff being written about there.
So yeah, we have a loose affiliation with them, and we always help them sort of with that conference a little bit. And I myself actually teach at the University of Comics, but only the non-majors. So that's like a wildly different experience than teaching the kids who are really dedicated at SAW. So I think that's my 2 minutes.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Carol, tell us a little bit about your background in education. You've got a diverse background in education and kind of what you're doing now.
Yes, I do. I have an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, from Syracuse University. And I went to undergraduate at a place called Middle Tennessee State University. And a lot of the people that were at MTSU have gone on to be big names all over the place. I'm not going to get into that, but it was a great place to be with people of all majors and disciplines. And it kind of, I was a painter, and I went and got my master's degree, and was telling stories in painting form, and so it ended up being, well, why don't I just, instead of writing all the text down below the painting, why don't I just add the words to the pictures? And I started, somebody gave me Pinky Brown, I looked at that, it was like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I like the way he kind of puts it all out there. And then I'm like very kind of like gutsy, you know, it's like, I want to meet someone, so I want to go here, and I just kind of go up to people and I go around and take risks, and I ended up in San Francisco, but I'm going to meet all the cartoonists out there, which is what I did. And then Justin Green and I had a baby. That's how we got together.
Okay, Pinky Brown, that's what you saw.
I got to meet him, I love him. So one of my jobs, because we all have to work somewhere, well, after I had the baby, and even before I had the baby, I was drawing comics. And because I had transitioned from painting to comics, and I had to kind of learn. I learned from people who just did it, you know, like our neighbors or the Crumbs, and you know, I'd go to Bill Griffith's house and hang with him, you know. So I learned to do it just by kind of absorbing and learning and kind of tweaking my own dials and stuff like that. Well, one of my jobs helped bring in money for rent. Oh, they need substitute teachers, okay. So I spent about 15 years as a sub. And when you go into the classroom and the kids are bouncing off the walls and the teacher is gone and left no lesson plans or some vague description like the books are on the shelf over there. And the kids are like, ah, going crazy and ready to attack. I'd say, hey, you know, comics, let's see Garfield, that guy Garfield, did you know Garfield? Let's draw him. And I just walk them through drawing and stuff. So I learned kind of a seat of the pants way of teaching. Well, when my second book came out, Late Bloomer, I thought, I'm tired of subbing in elementary and high school, especially when they wanted to keep you alive. So I went to DAP, which is the art school at University of Cincinnati, near where we live. I walked in and I said, I'm teaching comics. And they went, oh, I'm here. I know what I'm doing. I've been taught by the pros. I am a pro. I'm doing this. And they went, well, let's try it for a semester. Well, that was like 7 or 8 years ago. So I've continued to have full classes. And I always drag them here to space. Some of my students are here today. But
Thank
during the
you
whole
for the built-in audience.
So the whole time I've been doing my massive trilogy there, You'll Never Know, I've actually been teaching at DAP while trying to complete that trilogy. And one of the awesome things about being at DAP was that when you kids aren't there, I would go into the rooms and put the tables, set the tables up like a snake. And then I could lay all the pages out and look at them to check for a sequence, you know, and then I'd have to pull them all back together. And the next day the kids would be there and it's like, they were none the wiser. But I've learned the books that my artwork now, I take my own lessons that I teach them and I try to apply it to the work.
Great. Kayla, tell us a little bit about yourself and also Billy Ireland Cartoon Library.
Sure, okay. So I'm Caitlin McGurk. I'm the engagement coordinator at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library Museum here in Columbus, the world's largest library of cartoon and comic book art. How I came to be here was, well, I've been a comics fan and zinester and mildly a cartoonist for a lot of my life. And I got my bachelor's degree in English and didn't necessarily want to teach, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, so I decided to go to library school. And I went to get my graduate degree in library science with the promise to myself that I would be a comics librarian, which seemed crazy because there's not that many jobs. I think there's a total of 5 full-time comics librarians in the world. And but the secret is for library school, for anyone who's ever thought about going into library school, is that like if you actually play your cards right, you can become a librarian of anything. There's like a Woody Guthrie archive in New York City. There are Woody Guthrie librarians out there, you know? You can study whatever you want, as long as you're really diehard about it, which I was. And so I did a ton of volunteer work and internships and in anything related to comics as possible. I interned at Marvel Comics and built their archive there, and at, I should say that I'm from New York, so this is where all of that was happening. At Columbia University in New York City, where there was a huge donation of mini comics and underground comics. So I forced them to let me volunteer to archive and catalog this entire thing while I was in my first year of library science school, and I did, and that was when I really realized it was exactly what I wanted to do, for sure. While I was getting my graduate degree, wrote for Diamond Comics Bookshelf magazine. So they have Bookshelf and Previews. Everyone knows Previews. But Bookshelf is geared towards librarians and educators, and so I had sort of a column in there where I would write about comics and libraries, preservation, and stuff like that. And another internship I did was for the Center for Cartoon Studies, and I did that one summer, and then within the following year, they hired me on to be their full-time librarian. So I was a full-time librarian at the Shoals Library. For those of you who haven't heard of Center for Cartoon Studies, it's a 2-year MFA program. You also get a certificate degree up in White River Junction, Vermont. Really great place. And so I was there for about a year and a half. And then just last February, I was hired to come out here to Ohio, where I work at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And my position there is, like I said, engagement coordinator. So I do everything from running the blog and all of the outreach stuff online, social networking and things like that. I run a blog that where I highlight items from our collection and sort of talk about comics history and promote the events that we have going on, things like that. I also teach classes. So basically what we try to do at the Cartoon Library is get as many classes in as possible from as many different disciplines at OSU. Most of you probably know OSU is the largest university in America. And so there's a lot of outreach to be done to try to reach that many people. There are tons of professors at OSU that still don't even know that the Cartoon Library is there, which is really unfortunate. But anyway, so I'm regularly bringing classes in, and our whole, what we try to do is get anyone from any discipline to look at their subject through the lens of comics. So I've taught comics classes about racism issues and women's history and theology. So, because I strongly believe that you can apply comics to absolutely any discipline. So that's what we do there. I also run workshops with the Girl Scouts of America, and they can get a comic artist badge now, which only Girl Scouts can get, not Boy Scouts. So almost every week I have a troop in there getting their Girl Scout comic artist badge.
Now, wait a minute, I saw something about Boy Scouts now are wanting to do that.
Well, they haven't done it yet, so I'm gonna fight it. No, everyone, comic artist for everyone.
Girls take the lead.
Yeah, and last week I started a comics program for the local Montessori schools. So lots of stuff like that, and curating exhibits and whatever. So those are my teaching things.
Welcome to the panel. Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself and education and how it relates to comic books.
Sure. My name is Ryan Claytor, and I've been writing and illustrating a series of autobiographical comics for almost 10 years now. I did my undergrad at University of California, Santa Barbara, and my graduate work at San Diego State University. And in between those two schools, I also did an internship at Marvel Comics, so I'd be interested to hear when you did that. Mine was in 2003. Let's see. So I was teaching in San Diego when I met my then girlfriend, now wife, and she got this killer job at Michigan State University. She is an African art historian, and much like a comics librarian, there were only, I think, 2 jobs in the entire country when she applied. So she got the best of them, and we moved out to Michigan. And when we moved out here, she got me a bit of a partner hire while she was at it. The partner hire was, hey, you can teach one class for one semester, and that's it. And so the pot really wasn't all that sweet for me. So when they told me that, I said, okay, I want to teach a comics class. And It sounds kind of similar to Carol, where it's been enrolling ever since. It's been about 5 years now, and we're making baby steps toward comic specializations. We've got the largest public collection of comic books, not comic art, at Michigan State University.
You guys have that reciprocity.
Yeah, from what I understand, we sort of send people back and forth. Like if you get books, you send them our way, and if Randy gets art, he sends them your way. Randy's the comics bibliographer in the Special Collections Library at MSU. We also have a yearly event there that I'm the director of called the MSU Comics Forum, which brings in an award-winning cartoonist to be a keynote speaker, and it's a 2-day event where on Saturday we have Artist Alley, scholarly and artist panel discussions, the keynote speaker on Friday, and this year we've expanded it into a multi-day event including comics documentaries and all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm teaching at Michigan State University, the introductory comics class. I also teach at University of Michigan Flint, where I teach not only the intro class, but this is the first semester where they've given me an advanced comics class, so that's really exciting. And I guess I'll end it there.
Is that where Phoebe is? Phoebe Glanc?
I believe she's at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Yeah.
You're at Michigan State.
Yeah.
We don't have a Big Ten thing going between the two of you?
I grew up going to schools that did not have a football team, so I have no interest in...
I just want to make sure,
Wait, students, what league are we in now? They've changed this.
We're computer science.
Well played.
My people.
And as mentioned, we have a latecomer, Lee Smith to my right. If you can tell us a little bit about supplementalheroes.org and just briefly comics education, your role in it.
Okay, briefly because I know you're looking at.
Well, I want to make sure I've got some questions for all of you
Oh, good.
to help stimulate conversation, and I also want to make sure that we have plenty of time for audience participation as well.
As a high school kid, I drew comics on my own. And then probably around 18 or 19, since I grew up in southeastern Ohio, I realized there really wasn't the market there for me to do this professionally. So I needed, thanks to my parents, I came to the realization that if I wanted to live somewhere besides the basement, I would have to choose a different profession. So I went into education. I was an elementary school classroom teacher and was enjoying that. I worked in Columbus City schools.
What grade?
Grades essentially 4th and 5th. So we had a little bit of 3rd.
And Carol, you had K through 12?
Yes.
The whole
And I never knew until the morning of who I was going to
What the surprise was, yes. So, in doing this, I worked in an urban environment and kids couldn't read. Surprise. That's what our governor says. So I said, well, we need to try something different, because telling children every week, every year that they can't read very well isn't a particularly good motivator. So for my master's project, I said, let's use comic books and let's explore this in a quantitative way rather than a qualitative way. Everybody had stories about Johnny who couldn't read, and then lo and behold, he got insert title of comic here, Batman, Superman, Thor, whatever. And lo and behold, in a month, in a short period of time, he suddenly became really good at reading. And I thought, all right, well, nobody takes this very seriously, because, you can say, well, it was just Johnny, it was just Tommy, it was just Bernadette who happened to get that. And it doesn't apply to everybody. So I said, let's see if we can just slide comic books into a regular classroom and not change a whole lot of stuff, and see if that would work. I had a classroom of 21 boys. I had an all-boys classroom. And 11 of them, this was 4th grade, 11 of them were reading at 2 years or below. We have a lot of materials that are out in the education field that can help if a child is reading like a year below where they're supposed to be. But if it's 2 or more years, we don't have a program that's real effective. So I said, well, there's a market. And I came up with, essentially, the idea behind supplemental superheroes is that it literally is supplemental. You have your regular reading program, and instead of bringing the kids up to read some other book, you hand them a comic book and you do the same reading plans. We did it, and those 11 kids that were reading 2 or more years behind, some actually reading at a kindergarten level, within 1 year, the average was 1.5 years worth of growth. And, you know, I didn't even test them because these were like 1st grade and 2nd grade reading materials, and I was a 4th grade teacher. I didn't even have it. You know, I didn't have materials that could test them at that level, so I sent them to somebody else who was a 1st grade or 2nd grade teacher, and they said, what are you doing? And I said, comic books. And so I have taken my materials and posted them online, free for download at supplementalsuperheroes.org. So anybody who's an elementary school teacher, or if you know an elementary school teacher.
Well, welcome to the panel. I think welcome. I had a chance to think of some questions for everybody, and I think there's, as you go through this group of folks up here, there's a lot of similarities in stories. There's some very distinct specializations in what we do, differences between each other. I know as I've gone through the communities and I've spoken to individuals, we have found that it's about engagement. Those elementary school students at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade are making decisions about their academic career, meaning are they going to stay in school, and how far in school are they going to go? And it's starting right at that age range. I'm finding also in the urban schools that, just as you mentioned, the reading comprehension is down. So my background and my focus, and as I start to shape these questions, is about engagement and getting kids or students, I don't want to say kids anymore because it's just students, and it can be at any level, but students interested in reading, specifically reading comic books, and then in reinforcing that literacy through the creation of their own comic book. So as I open up this panel discussions, Tom, I'm going to start with you. Why did you start this school? And I know you briefly talked about New York a little bit, but why did you start SAW? And from an education perspective, how did that shape your decision?
I think I'm a college dropout, much like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And I dropped out of SVA at School of Visual Arts, which was one of the only, like 1 or 2 cartooning programs at the time. This was 1987. Because what I saw was nothing like what I wanted. And I was a 17-year-old kid, so I didn't know exactly what I wanted. But I knew I wanted an intensive program that was focused on all the stuff I didn't know at the time about comics. And it wasn't at SVA, and I dropped out after a year. So eventually, through the machinations of fate and whatever, I wound up teaching there at the same school I dropped out of. But the program is getting much, much better. I mean, it's excellent now. But even still, I sort of wanted to try my own ideas. Plus, I was getting sort of just kicked out of New York. I mean, New York, you either succeed on this massive level or you get kicked out, I feel. And I feel like I got kicked out in a way. We're tired of losing money all the time, so we moved out. So I knew I wanted to take everything I was good at in teaching to a new level or whatever. But it's also difficult for me to make institutional connections, not having an MFA or whatever. And I love being a sole learner up against the world anyway. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to start my own school. I didn't exactly know how to do it, but I knew there was a need for it. And the kind of material I wanted to learn, the kind of instruction I wanted way back when I was 17 in 1987, I knew there would at least be a few dozen young maniacs like that out there who would want to learn in such an environment. And I take comics seriously and I take teaching seriously. And if I could just only find those students, it would be just a great symbiosis. So far, so good after 1 year.
Let me ask that. I'm going to start. I've got the question, but I wanted to ask this about the group as well. When we start talking about education, and I've had this discussion recently with some individuals, the topic comes up when you put the words teaching and comics together. Are we teaching comics? Are we teaching through comics? or are we teaching with comics? And there's a very distinct difference from each one of those sentences. You know, we're not teaching the background. I'm not talking about the lore of Thor or the, you know, when did Galactus make his first appearance in Fantastic Four? That's not what I'm about. I'm not saying that's a bad thing if anybody is, but there are very distinct differences with that. So teaching comics, teaching through comics, or teaching with comics. Ryan, when I did a little research on yourself, and I've had a chance to meet you in the past at some of the expos that we've gone to, I noticed on the website you have graphic design really highlighted in what you do. So aspects of Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. And as you talk about MSU, those three concepts, talk a little bit about your role in that and how you do it.
I think what you may have seen is some residual teaching stuff that I've done, which is in some graphic design areas. I teach Photoshop, Illustrator, web design, introductory art classes, in addition to comics classes. But I do teach a lot of those programs in my comics class as well, because comics is becoming such a digital medium nowadays. So, you know, students, in my opinion, should know how to scan their pages and how to output for print and how to format for the web. And if they're interested, I'm happy to teach them, you know, how to use their Wacom tablets and things like that. So I feel like I have a good digital background to pull from, but I also stress the fundamentals of analog methods too. So we go over penciling and inking techniques and inking tools, in addition to you know, comic-specific topics like pacing and pagination and panelization, and what all those things mean to the narrative that they're creating. So if you're asking about digital-specific stuff, I guess I could go into that if you wanted to, but in my opinion, that's kind of the boring, like, necessary stuff we need to do in order to tell stories. But really, I'm more interested in storytelling in comics, and that's what I focus on most in my class. I always tell the students, you know, this Photoshop, Illustrator stuff, you know, for digital lettering or scanning in your pages, we can make that happen easily. The hard stuff is learning to craft a comic that's going to read seamlessly to your reader and tell the story or the message that you want to tell. So that's what I'm most interested in. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and it sets this up too for Robert. You know, the differences between teaching comics, teaching the creation of comics versus teaching through comics, and maybe more from a literary background. What are some of the biggest misconceptions when you talk about what you do and your role in education in comics? What are some misconceptions that folks would have about what you do? Or how you do it?
Yeah, that it's dumbed down, I think probably. That somehow teaching literature and looking at these ideas and concepts that have been around throughout history and throughout literature are somehow, you know, watered down when they're in a comic book. I think the opposite can happen. There's so many generalizations that people make about, you know, comics are this, literature is this. You know, the bottom line is that they can be anything. And so you look for what's good and what's interesting and what says something, you know, interesting about this particular subject. And so, you know, we look for the best that we can study for whatever reasons. And your point about, you know, are we teaching comics, teaching through comics, or teaching with comics? I think it can be all three. In the course that I teach, literature of comics and graphic novels, one of the assignments that they do, they use Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, as sort of like a base text for the beginning of the course as we're reading other books. And then at some point they write an essay that is conceived of in a way that Scott McCloud conceives of understanding comics, where you have a narrator talking to the reader. And that gives them enormous flexibility. And so at an art school, of course, it's a little different too, because probably at least half of the class is comprised of illustration majors. And so they just glom onto that immediately, and everyone's got a lot of skill there. But it teaches them to think differently and to think critically. And one of the things that opened up to me as you were talking, and as Lee was talking, is that a lot of times when kids come out of high school into college, they have these very set ideas about like what writing prose is, and they just kind of know how to basically write to the grade. They don't think creatively, they don't think critically, but asking them to create something in a different format, to use the comics format, even as we're talking about comics, to teach through comics and teach with comics basically at the same time, that actually forces them out of like a comfortable sort of blasé position and makes them engage more critically with what they're doing. And I've had a lot of students that said, I thought I would do the comics version of the assignment, because I give them the option of doing a prose essay too. And they said, but it took too much time. I had to stop. I had to just go write the essay. And a lot of times those essays are not great. But the comics that are put together out of that assignment are fantastic. And I really enjoy that part of it too. So I think maybe the other misconception is that you can't use all of them together in an interdisciplinary, multimodal would be one of the ways to describe it, multimodal kind of way.
Carol, a question for you. In your experience, and you've had the opportunity to gain insight into this industry as a professional and also as a teacher. Why comics now? I mean, in the past, comics have been dismissed as the funny books. We had the whole, the origin of the Comic Code Authority that came out, the seduction of the innocent that goes way back. But why comics now? Why is it so important that we're talking about comics in education?
Why comics now? I don't know why they're so hot.
They've been here forever. They've been here forever, but at the same time, ironically, they're not readily available. In the professional distribution model of reaching comic fans, the comic book stores are more like jazz clubs back in the day. You get a backwater, find this comic book store. They're not in the drugstores on spinner racks anymore. So, they were shunned. But now, why comics? Why do we want them?
Well, I think there's just a different range. And one of the disclaimers I set up my students notice when I first day of class, I said I'm not interested in comics, I don't read comics, I don't like comics. Remember that? And I said that because I want to I'm not interested in the stereotypical comic book in that sense. And I also showed the line of like art and literature, and here's comic books and art. I said I'm kind of over here. I'm interested in the art aspects and the storytelling aspects, and this is more of a self-expression rather than an homage to the form. People say, Scott McCloud, you look. No, I don't want to know that stuff. I am an intuitive creator, and I'm listening to my inner voice. So yeah, you got to know how to put it on the page and do this kind of stuff. And so that's the approach I take, is that you do it because this is what you got to do. Or you paint, or you sculpt, or you write a book. So it's an art form. It's more of an art form, and I completely shun the industry, the whole any ism thing. I don't want that, because I don't want it to kill the magic for me. So why comics, I think, is that as they've become less about the stereotypical comic book, and now I think people run across stories and maybe different forms and different manifestations of storytelling. Oh, that kind of opens the door to living, to kind of walking into that world a little bit. And then people go, you told a story that sounded like a conversation. You know what? I have a conversation like that I want to write down. So it's like, hey, have at it, So there's something about and I'll have to put it to autobiographical, as it kind of opened the door to a personal connection that you're not going to find. You don't feel personally connected to Iron Man, I guess. Maybe you do, maybe you see yourself. But it's not it's fantasy, it's a different realm. And so the whole genre of comics that made it, like you said, bring it to your life, bring it into your personal life. And I'm the queen of, hey, you need to know something from my personal life, I'll draw it for you. I don't shy away from telling secrets. So I think that kind of helps. That kind of helps people to feel like, oh, okay, this is a form I can kind of do. And as far as teaching or anything like that, man, I just walk in. I say, look, I'm a professional at what I do. You want to learn something? I'll teach you the basics. But mostly what I do is cheerlead.
The way I very much identify with that with the students that we work with as well through that creation process. You know, it's exciting to watch them go through the process and take their idea, put it on paper, and it becomes tangible, and they can see that. Now, once that work has become tangible, it's got to go somewhere. Caitlin, to kind of piggyback on that momentum, with the library and you being the curator there, how are you viewing education right now in comics? I mean, you're looking at a completely different perspective than from the school level and that initial engagement. But how are you viewing it?
Well, I mean, because I don't really, I never actually teach someone how to make comics in the way that you do in Wacom tablets and all that kind of stuff. So I have sort of like two different things that I work in. I guess I'll start by talking about working with kids, which I really, really enjoy doing. I feel like there is, you know, you sort of said something similar to this earlier. There's nothing worse you can do than like force kids to read stuff that they don't want to read. Like, what a way to turn someone off from an education. So if kids want to read comics, you should let them read comics and find good comics for them to read. Just find better comics and make better comics to give to young people. So, you know, because I had a rough childhood, and I'm the kind of person that feels like comics really like saved me and were like the perfect form of expression for me, the thing that really opened my eyes up and changed my life when I started picking up, you know, some of my favorite comics. And I think it's really important to help a lot of young people get that at an early age. With the different like Girl Scout groups and school groups that I work with, you can see, and I'm sure you guys have noticed this too in grade schools, you can see a real difference working with kids between maybe like a 4th grader and a 6th grader or somewhere around there, where like this self-awareness thing kicks in, and like kids are, you know, totally open to expressing themselves in any kind of way when they're younger and they're wild and they have weird ideas and they don't really care. And then all of a sudden you teach like a 6th grader and they're drawing but they're covering their papers so that you can't see what they're drawing, and they won't let you make suggestions to them and stuff like that. And I think like getting in there right at that time, especially with comics as a form of expression, to show them that like, you know, you don't have to be, you know, a fine artist or something like that. You know, I think that being able to show kids the variety of styles in comics, that you don't have to be, you know, a master fine artist to create comics and tell a good story and express yourself, is really, really important at that age, because it can be very intimidating a few years later, you know. I heard this great thing on maybe NPR or something a while ago that Mo Willems said, where he was talking about like, all kids draw. Every single kid starts out as an artist, you know, and at some point kids stop. Like either someone tells them they're not as good as the other person in their class, or for some reason they just give it up and they're like, I'm just not an artist anymore. And that, of course, doesn't have to be true. The thing that he used as an analogy was, you know, just because you're not going to be in the NBA doesn't mean you stop playing basketball with your friends if you like to play basketball. So why would you stop drawing just because you're, you know? I just thought it was a really good comparison. So I feel like showing kids that they can use this to express themselves at a really young age is really, really important. And as far as what I do at the library, what we try to do there is just, you know, it's part educating people about comics history, for sure, because there's so much to learn. So through our exhibits, we try to make them as engaging and educational as possible. And then with the OSU classes, just really showing people that, you know, comics have been around for a long time, have tackled a lot of different subjects, and can be used in, you know, any kind of way, and just getting them to think more about the format and studying it, you know, primary source materials for their history classes, you know, and stuff like that. So, yeah, that answers it.
All right, I'll take it. I'm going to follow up with a question for Lee.
Okay.
So, you talked about that student that every kid draws, every kid is doodling, and you got the elementary school student, and especially in maybe more of a financially challenged area like an urban school. Why comics now? Why do you think they're important in the classroom or important to education? And when all of a sudden did comics become part of education?
I'm still not sure that they're part of education. I think they're still worming their way in. I think we're at the beginning stage of that, and I think that that's happening because we're becoming more and more visual. Instead of all text blogs on the internet, you have, how many times have you, okay, I'll take myself and say Facebook, and you see pictures. How many times are the posts that you get from Facebook or on the internet, how many of them are images as opposed to nothing but words? We're becoming more and more visual, and this is a visual medium. I think we've also reached that stage, partly because they aren't on the spinner racks everywhere, that what's old is new again. People are rediscovering that there's this thing called comic books, and they're kind of cool if you really kind of look at them. And so I think that's that's one reason why we're starting to explore this. There's a big movement with technology, because we know that standing in front of children, especially urban kids, and talking to them for any length of time, for 45 minutes, and expecting them to learn, really isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. So you got to try something new, something unique, and I guess in an urban environment, I tried it because other things weren't working. So let's try something new. Those kids that were turned off because year after year you keep telling them they can't read. Remember last year when you couldn't read? Well, you can't read anything. You still can't read. But if you find something that they can do, suddenly, I literally saw it. You saw kids who hated reading. You get out the comic book, and you start, with the basics of this is a panel, this thing with the little arrowy thing, that means that's what he said. With the little circle things, that's what they thought. And this word here, that's like a sound effect. Okay. And suddenly, people who can't read or who struggle with reading are able to read with comic books. And the words are still as hard as they used to be. It's not like suddenly they've dummied down the comic book experience. Even if you get like Marvel Adventures, if you think that's written at a second or a third grade level, even a fourth grade level, you're in for a surprise. It's still written with hard words, but the kids can use all the skills that we've been teaching them in reading, to use the words around it. Only now they have a visual clue as well. Oh, well, Spider-Man's punching Dr. Octopus, so this word here must mean some sort of negative image, because if he said "I like you," he wouldn't be punching. So it must have some negative connotation. And suddenly we're getting a chance to use inference skills that with the first grade reading books that you try and give fourth grade readers because they read at the first grade level, you just don't get. So one of the great things I think about comic books, at least all the comic books that I've seen that are put out by independent publishers and even Marvel and DC, they don't talk down to kids. Tiny Titans is great, and it has, but he's not talking down to kids. He's not saying you can't understand this. He's actually talking to fellow adults, and so kids adapt to that, I think. So I think that's why it works for them.
Yeah. I'm going to try to explain this. From having a daughter that went through elementary school, being an involved parent, and from teaching it for a while as a sub. Yes, I had my own contained classroom, first, second grade, and I became in literacy was my focus area. I was interested in that, and there's kind of a magic window where you learn decoding skills and you learn to interpret language, and that's usually between age 5 and 7. And that's a difference. If you learn during that time, that's when your vocabulary can be either 600,000 words or 2 million. If you can kind of slip into the window of learning to read and decode during that time. So what happens is, or what I've found happens is, if it's easy to read and all of that at a young age, you're going to read comics, you're going to read picture books, you're going to read whatever. But the turnoff that you brought up, that they kind of like always draw and then they kind of goes away, the analytical part of the brain, or those other functions that need to kick in, you've got your time when you're learning about words, and then there's a time when there's other systems of your brain that develop and you have to get going. That kind of eclipses the natural ability to make pictures. So one of the key things to do is to kind of keep that alive with elementary kids, because you don't want the total like eclipsing of that part to happen. The best thing that you can do with like middle school and up, and it even happens through, I told my students, the child's brain is not fully developed until age 28. And so you have students get the perfect time, and the thing that works the most is when you connect personally to their experience. So if they can see themselves in the work, or they know they have the potential to tap into something that matters to them, and that they want to talk about themselves. One of my most chilling, I still get chilled when I'm thinking about it, experiences was I had to go into a juvenile detention center to teach comics. And we had to go through like a system of like 16 locked doors. I mean, these were kid killers. These were like the worst of the worst. And I had to sit them down at a table, and we were gonna just talk and stuff. Well, they were belligerent and all these horrible things, and they earned their way here. And I got them back to that time when they could reconnect with their picture and simplified words. And I had them then, because they were adolescents, I connected to the part of, let's talk about what happened. When mom was beating the crap out of dad, how'd you feel about that? And then that made great comics, because I connected where they were at developmentally with where they were at emotionally. And those kids, that was one of the best experiences I've ever had teaching comics.
At this time, I'd like to open up questions. I have a final round of questions for our panel, which would incorporate a closing thought. But right now, I'd like to open up to the crowd. What questions do you have for our panel?
So everything that we've heard has been very kid-centric for younger people. How do you educate the public, people that you know who have no real concept about how cool comics can be? How do you turn older people on to comics?
Bob, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think you're talking about more of an outreach or just like personal kind of thing, right? Give them good stuff. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
Find subjects that they like and
Yeah.
apply comics to it.
I always tell people to start by asking a question like, what movies do you like, or what television series do you like, or what books do you read? Well, there's comic books akin to that. Somebody who likes Lost is not necessarily going to read the same books as somebody who likes the Food Network. I mean, maybe they will, but they're very different sections. And it's kind of like telling somebody, books are great. Go into that bookstore and find one. Nobody would ever say that.
Right.
But in comics, sometimes we want to think, oh, well, there's this comic that's, highly canonized, so everyone should like it. Well, I handed Will Eisner's A Contract with God to one of my teachers, and she was very turned off. But I handed her Tom Beeland's True Story, Swear to God, and she couldn't get enough of it. So it's really about tailoring your recommendations to people, I think. So it's kind of our job as comics proponents to learn as much as we can about the medium and to know what books are out there. Oh, well, let's try this thing.
I make my kids do reports. They have to either be Clark Kent, Lois Lane, or Jenny Olsen. And I got the hats laid out, right? They have to come to class, they go find the books, come back, they become that person, and they give the report. So that way, the whole class gets to learn about a lot of different cartoonists that maybe even missed some.
What other questions are out there? All right, I'm going to set this last volley of questions up this way. As I talk to teachers, as I talk to parents, as I talk to just people in general, we talk about lifelong learning. And it starts with, and we talk about reading and literacy, we talk about just something, Caitlin, you said, give them something that they like. And I believe that we can save the world one comic book at a time, and if we start giving out comics, and the only way to become a better reader is by practicing. And what better thing to practice with than by reading comics? As those students read comics and they go through that pathway, there's opportunities to teach them using comics. There's opportunities to teach them through comics. And then there's also opportunities for that student as they develop to be taught to make comics, to teach the actual comic. I'd like to open it up just to my right and go down the panel, and in your perspective and what your niche is in education and comics, 30 seconds or less, what's next? What's next for you and your focus and how you see education and comics evolve?
I guess let's see if we can get them into the schools. That's where I'm thinking. The evidence seems to suggest that this thing works. Let's put it in the schools. And when I say put it into the schools, some of the problems are that people, like we said, just say, here's comics. Here's a bunch of comics, and now you'll be a better reader. Well, if I put 40 calculus calculators, graphing calculators, into a high school calculus class and said, here you go, but I didn't tell them like how to use it or anything, you may have some improvements in math, but probably not so much. I mean, what you need to do is teach them how to use these things, and I would think that's the next step. We know kids like them. We know comic book artists want to use them. We need to talk now, I guess, about how do you get teachers on board on this. And I guess that's one of my things is that that's where we need to be.
Robert, in your next step of teaching through comics, what's next? What's the next?
Specifically at CCAD
Or in just in general?
In general, I mean, we are having conversations about creating a sequential art track within illustration. And I think overall, some of this is what I think is happening, and some of it is what I think will happen and want to happen. Is fewer divisions between ways of thinking and fewer divisions between everybody's got their own little territory. These cultural rules that we create in order to give ourselves a sense of place and power, I don't think ultimately are very helpful in a broad general sense. And applying to comics, I think there's so many different ways that everything can work together in a much more holistic fashion that I think is really interesting. So more conversations between reading, making, bringing all that together rather than thinking of them as completely separate and never crossing entities.
Tom, as a director of the school, what comics education, what's next?
I'm just excited that there are so many adults coming out of the woodwork trying comics. And it's an art form maybe they have a little bit of experience with, maybe they've read them, maybe they drew them a little bit in adolescence or something. But I get tons of people through the door, especially when we do our week-long programs or our 2-week programs. I'm a graphic designer, I just wanted to spend a week doing comics and nothing else. Or I'm in a period of transition. I had so much of that back in March when we had 2 weeks. If we had people just in transition where they're like, I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do, so they take some comics for a week. I just think it's another art form that enriches the spirit and does all these humanizing things that art does. And I'm so glad when those people come our way. I'm not trying to send anybody off with ideas that they're going to make, that they've got a career ahead of them or whatever. You just pick up a guitar, you pick up a piano, you draw some comics, you just make some art. And I'm just thrilled that there are more and more people just trying it out. And so I'm there for those people, but I'm also there for the people who just get the fire too. I'm really there for them. And they're like, I can't do this forever. And I'm like, okay, let's talk.
Carol, the frontier of comics and education as you forge through it, 30 seconds or less, what's next?
Retirement.
So you retire, and what happens with comics? Do you read them? Do you make them?
Okay, my personal plans.
Sure.
My personal plan is I'm going to get this minivan and trick it out.
A minivan and trick it out, you said?
I'm going to trick out some kind of van.
Okay.
I'm going to go to an auction and get a van. Somebody help me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll put a mattress in there and some shelves and a light And nice seat. I don't mind a stick shift. In fact, I prefer it. I just want to, seriously. Okay, at my school at DAP, they're like, I keep saying this is big, let's go, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, let's build a program, and they're like, huh? So they're not getting it. I hope I get a job next fall.
There's nobody from the faculty here, right? That's your boss.
No, I love comics. I love it because I don't think I'd love it if I wasn't doing it. I'm a pen giver, okay? And I like sharing that. And I get up there and I'm all crazy and I have a lot of fun. But I'm also working, you know, I've got these books and I've got this stuff and I do want to go to the shows and I do like finding myself in laundromats teaching lessons at nursing homes. I've had to do that. Come on, ladies, we'll meet in here. Don't mind the dryer noises. Just drown out some of those other demons. But no, I just like finding myself, like, I teach as an adjunct. I'd love to be a professor somewhere for real, you know, I mean, like committed, but at my age, they're not going to hire me. So I'm just going to plug away at it, teach when I can. I want to tour, I want to go drive around, and yeah, at a certain point, I'm just going to be too tired. I'm not going to want to do anything. But I'll never stop looking for the teaching moment. The thing I love the most about all of this is when I can connect this person with this person with some knowledge I have or some connection I have. So I can help people to get to the next thing. I'll never stop.
Caitlin, your road down to education and comics?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll also use this moment as a plug for like what's next for us in general in that vein, the cartoon library, because there's something huge that's happening. We're closing in our current facility in a month, and when we open up on September 1st, we're going to be in Sullivan Hall, if anyone knows the OSU campus, 5 times bigger, with 3 cartoon art galleries in there, and also we'll actually have programming space for the first time. So speaking of what's next for education, we're going to be doing hopefully a lot more classes with even, you know, bringing in more disciplines. Like I said, that's what's really important to me, is trying to get exposure from a variety of subject matters at OSU to the comics format and how they can, you know, teach it in their classes and stuff like that. Take it a little more seriously, look at it, you know, maybe even for the very first time. We're going to also be doing a lot more workshops and bringing in comics educators and having people do lectures. Someone like this, maybe, and hopefully working with more community groups. We really want to start like hosting comics clubs, drawing parties, things like that. Like, what's next for us is really trying to like strengthen Columbus as a comics town, and we want the library to be like the center for that community. So, yeah.
Ohio, go for Ohio.
Ohio.
Well, Ryan, as we go north, last but not least, your vision, what's next?
Well, I told you I'm teaching at Michigan State University, and I'm also in an adjunct capacity, and we're working toward comic specialization, making something more formalized within the school right now. It's in very embryonic stages, but we are in talks, so keeping my fingers crossed.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the panel for joining in today and your perspective. Round of applause for them.